Outback Christmas, 1930, by Doug Whitley. Read by Doug Whitley. Christmas should not be this blasted hot. The words echoed through her head like a chant. The sun beat down on her like a bludgeon. Every step stirred the red dust of the outback into a cloud that settled over her hat, her clothes, her swollen body like a blanket. It stuck to the sweat in red rivulets like blood streaming down her flesh. She could feel the grit in her teeth and taste the dirt on her tongue. How did her life ever come to this? Pregnant, alone, walking on a deserted road, miles from anywhere, in a country half the world away from home. She and Stephen had left home to start over after the market crash in 1929, to find a better life after they'd lost everything. Starting over. Starting over in their marriage, starting over in their lives. But their life hadn't started over. Her father's words came back to her. If you're not happy with who you are, you will never be happy with where you are, no matter what you do. Stephen bought an opal mine through an agent, sold her jewels, mortgaged what little they actually owned to get them to this God-forsaken place with dreams of opals lying on the ground like manna from heaven, and a euphoria that burst like a bubble when they saw the empty hole in the ground they had purchased. It had been a swindle from start to finish. Now she was pregnant and alone. Stephen was dead, killed in a cave-in because they couldn't even afford the boards to shore up what little mine they had dug. Oh, they had dug it. She whose hands had once been called lovely, hands that were made for wearing diamonds and gracing the keys of the grand piano the bailiffs had carted off with everything else. Now her hands were as rough and calloused as her soul. Still she walked on, the heat shimmering off the track and the red earth around her. As she walked, her mind played back the images over the last months like the black and white news of the day that came on before the main feature at the Palace Cinema in Sydney. Stephen had lavishly booked first-class passage to Australia. They sailed into Sydney Harbour like millionaires. Then came the disappointment when the investment turned to dust. Stephen got another claim, but it too was empty of opals. The government paid $1 a foot just for digging, so they had lived on that, digging just to eat. Then the pregnancy. The doctor smiling as he delivered the news, frowning when she asked if he could get rid of it. "No, young lady, I cannot get rid of it. I suggest you look forward to the coming child." She and Stephen had gotten an invitation from one of her father's business acquaintances in Melbourne for the Melbourne Cup. They scraped together the train fare and stayed with the man in his mansion, living like princes in the last of their finery left over from the old days, looking out over Phillip Bay from St. Kilda. Even though she was 8 months pregnant, she was determined to go to the Cup and enjoy herself. She made one of her old frocks work around her swollen belly, put a hat on her head, and paraded out as if she were at Royal Ascot on Derby Day. She had gotten looks from some, but she didn't care. For a time the ruin was forgotten, and she was a young heiress from Connecticut again, like the days when Stephen had courted her. A smile curled around her lips as the memory floated through her parched brain. Farlap had won the Cup. They had danced and celebrated as if they themselves were the owners. "Maybe one day," Stephen had shouted over the crowd. Then Stephen had gambled away their winnings, and if she hadn't purchased return tickets, they would have been stranded without anything. Her father's business acquaintance generosity lasted until Stephen asked him for money. Not even the rich had money to lend after the crash. Her steps were slower now. The heat was bearing down even more. She had forgotten to bring water. But then, she hadn't planned to need any. She was going to walk into the wilderness until she passed out, and then she would die, and the child inside of her dying with her. She trudged on, the smile fading quickly. She could see her father. He was walking toward her. Beside him was their butler, Childers, carrying a tray with a tall pitcher of lemonade, the water beading on its cold opulence. There was food on the tray. Tea cakes, watercress sandwiches. Her father was dressed in his suit of white linen, Childers in his uniform, just like the old days. She could see the ice in the glass beside the pitcher. She was a girl again. It was summer in Newport. No, her brows came together as she struggled with the image. It was hot, but it wasn't July. She wasn't at home. She was in Australia. She had something she must do. I can't remember. Closer now. She could hear the ice tinkling in the cut glass pitcher. Is she dead? Elizabeth heard the precise vowels of England as she wondered where she was. She was in a cool, dark place, lying on something soft. Gentle hands were cooling her face with a wet cloth. There was a humming, cooing sound coming from an Aborigine woman. No, sir. Baby coming, though. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. She's in a bad way now. Sweet oblivion swept over her as dreams and memory merged into Elizabeth's mind. Images of her father, her mother, her family rolled through her thoughts. She drifted. She slept. Slowly, awareness came back to her. She was in Australia. She was pregnant. She was alone. She wanted to die. You passed out on the track just south of the ridge. Peggy found you and brought you here. Is there someone we can send for? Husband, family, friends? These words were spoken in caring tones, more care than she had heard for a long time. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry. It was hard to speak. She managed a raspy whisper. No one. Then what were you doing out there by yourself? No food, no water in this heat? You could have died. That's what I wanted. Ah. Didn't do such a good job then, did you? The soft sarcasm of England coming through. Do you have a name? I am Elizabeth. Elizabeth Wyndham Garrett. Right. I'm Neville. This young lady is Peggy. You're welcome here until you're welcome here. Right. I've got to get back to work. Mines don't dig themselves. Neville strode out. Elizabeth rolled slowly to her side, her pregnant belly rolling with her. Her child heavy inside, restless in its confinement. She could see her skin rise and fall with little movements. Every now and then a kick would jolt her. There was a human being inside of her. He's getting ready to come out now soon. You'll see. Peggy smiled, her white teeth flashing in the dark room. Going to be a fine little Joey. You are called Miss Elizabeth. My name's Pangari, but that means a shadow in my language. But Mr. Neville, he calls me Peggy because, well, he can't pronounce my real name. Peggy. Peggy, where am I? You're in Enlightening Ridge. Mr. Neville Blackstone's house under the ground at his open mine. A good thing, too. Mr. Neville's a good man. Lot of yabbos chasing around here, robbers and ratters. Come to a good place to have your baby. Silent tears began to stream down Elizabeth's face. She was having a baby. She was having a baby. She had planned to die in the dust, and now she was having a baby. It was Christmas Eve. The day passed slowly. Peggy told Elizabeth about finding her along the track, how she dragged Elizabeth to Mr. Neville's house because that's where Peggy worked. Peggy had washed the dust from Elizabeth's body and dressed her in one of Mr. Neville's nightshirts. Mr. Neville don't use no nightshirt no more. He just fall into bed, clothes and all. I sure love Mr. Neville like he was my family. Mr. Neville rescued me. I was drunken all the time. He found me in Sydney begging for whiskey. Just helped me up, took me to a church where some nice people took care of me. He left monies to feed me, helped me. A good Samaritan he was. When I'd sobered up, it was Peggy again. He said I needed a housekeeper. I only didn't have a house exactly, and did I want a job, but here I am, and I don't get drunk no more. All this streamed out of Peggy in a pleasant, humorous flow as Peggy cared for Elizabeth, as if she were a little child. Elizabeth could see Peggy's broad nose, dark skin topped by a thatch of hair bleached orange by the sun. Her kind eyes as she slowly moved about, bringing food, getting water. Peggy, what do I do with this baby when I have it? You love that baby. You've got to love that baby. I had a baby once, and the government come, took him away. That's why I was drinking. I don't know where my boy is now. You love that baby. Everything else you figure along the way. Elizabeth truly had no idea what to do with the baby. She had been reared by nannies and governesses. When her own baby brother was born, she was just a child. He died so soon after he came into the world, she had little memory of him. It was too much to take in. She slept again to the soft crooning of Peggy moving peacefully. And then all was quiet. Elizabeth flew up with a cry on her lips, such a pain as she had never felt. The baby was coming. Neville rushed into the room, took one look, ran out shouting for Peggy. Peggy came back in, took Elizabeth by the hand. It's going to be all right now. It's going to be all right. It's all right. The baby's coming, just in time for Christmas, too. Just like that baby Jesus in the creche in the manger. I'll get the district nurse. No time for the nurse now. The baby's coming right now. What do we do? Pour some water, keep some things clean, and pray. Her body'll do the rest. A low, groaning growl escaped from Elizabeth, and Neville fled from the room. The baby came as babies do. And after the struggle, the turmoil, Elizabeth marveled at this tiny being nursing at her breast. Peggy had washed the baby, bathed Elizabeth, found cloth for a diaper, a fresh nightshirt for her. What you gonna call him? A name. A name. Elizabeth had not thought about a name. All she had thought about was ending her life, his life as well, not about a name for this helpless bundle now sleeping nestled on her chest. In the quiet, she heard the sound of a Victrola playing Christmas music. Sleep in heavenly peace. Then she heard Good King Wenceslas. How about Wenceslas? No, a name. At that moment, the choir began scratchily to sing. The first Noel, the angels did sing. Noel. What about Noel? His name is Noel. For Christmas? What a Christ child born on Christmas Day. Elizabeth smiled weakly. Peggy went on about how Jesus was born in a cave and all the shepherds came. Elizabeth knew the Christmas story because her family had always gone to church when she was a child. But it had been a long time since she had thought about Jesus or heard those words, Christ child, A long time since she'd given any thought to the God she had learned about as a child. Just then, Neville entered with a tray and two of the most beautiful cut crystal goblets she had ever seen. I thought a toast might be in order. Wet the baby's head and all that. She's going to call him Noel. To Noel. To Noel, she said softly. As she tasted the wine, its red darkness smooth on her tongue, she thought how odd that in the midst of Australia, at a place called Lightning Ridge, in a borrowed night church, she should be toasting her newborn child with wine served in a cut crystal goblet, poured from a crystal decanter. Where did all this come from? I've been saving it for when I strike it rich. This seemed like as good an occasion as any. The rest of it is a long story for another time. Right now, you and Noel, need your rest. It's almost time for Father Christmas. Happy Christmas, good night, sleep well. Give a shout if you need anything. Neville left. Peggy curled up in a chair in the corner of the room and was soon softly snoring. Elizabeth eased the baby to her side and slept. She awoke slowly to a smell of coffee. She wrapped herself in the languor of the moment. She remembered waking in the night to nurse the baby, and again when Peggy took him to change his nappy, as Aussies called diapers. She had not felt such peace as she now had in this place for a long time. Noel was sleeping. She slowly eased herself up and began to look around. Yesterday was another time and place. Everything was a blur in her mind. Her eyes roved over the smooth red walls of the room, scattered with English hunting prints. The furniture was quite fine. Even the bed in which she lay was ornately carved from mahogany. Everything around her was completely at odds with its setting. This was an underground room, dug out of the red outback earth, but what was in it was quite fine. Peggy came in with a silver tray laden with food, fruit, porridge, juice, and real coffee. Good morning, Miss Elizabeth. How are you feeling? How's the baby? You haven't even seen what Father Christmas left you last night. As she spoke, Peggy put down the tray and lifted two old red socks hanging at the foot of the bed. See what Father Christmas brought you? And the baby too? Peggy laid the socks gently on Elizabeth's lap. Elizabeth felt the wonder swelling inside her like the Christmas morning excitement of her childhood. With her lower lip between her teeth and the light of anticipation in her eyes, she slowly put her hand into the first sock and brought out a small silver spoon emblazoned with a crest. Then a tiny cup and a sterling baby rattle wrapped in a flannel pouch. She gasped softly when she saw the silver, and tears began to fill her eyes. She turned to her own stocking, and there drew out an orange, a handkerchief embroidered with small purple flowers and scented with lavender. There were two small lavender sachets, and at the very bottom, carefully wrapped, were the two crystal glasses from the night before. Tears were now streaming down her face. She had not known such kindness since she left home years before. How could such things be? Oh, Peggy, I have nothing for you or Mr. Neville. You have the baby. He's a gift to all of us. You coming to us is a gift. Besides, we don't need much. When you finish breakfast and feel up to it, Mr. Neville says, please join us in the drawing room, as he calls it. Elizabeth marveled again as she ate and made herself presentable in what could only be a dressing gown, again appropriated from Mr. Neville. She scooped up Noel and slowly made her way through the house, following the sound of Christmas music from the Victrola. Happy Christmas! Come, sit. I would say by the fire, but we don't have one, and certainly we don't need one today. The drawing room had lovely furniture, oil lamps, and one of the most anemic trees she had ever seen. Sorry about the tree and all that, but your New England blue spruce don't do well down under, and, well, the eucalyptus was the best I could find on short notice. It has a wonderful smell. But what are the decorations? Opals. Black opals. It's all I had to put on the tree. The tree was covered in small, rough pieces of black opal, hung on wires that danced and shimmered in the lamplight. They're not worth much as opals go, but I had them lying around. Elizabeth went to the tree and cupped one of the opals in her hands. This is what all the fuss was about. This stone was why she had left home to seek a fortune. And here they were, hanging on the scraggliest tree she had ever seen. She smiled at the thought. Please, sit down. We have a tradition on Christmas morning to read the Christmas story from the Bible before we open presents. I hope you'll join us, please. Elizabeth sat cradling Noel in her arms. Peggy sat with her on the settee, tucking her bare feet under her. Neville smiled, cleared his throat, and began to read. It came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, and to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was, that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came unto them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Saviour, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. You shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there were with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts, praising God, and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men. And it came to pass, as the angels had gone away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, Let us now go even unto Bethlehem, and see this thing which is come to pass, which the Lord hath made known unto us. And they came with haste, and found Mary, and Joseph, and the babe, lying in a manger. And when they had seen it, they made known abroad the saying which was told them concerning this child. And all they that heard it wondered at those things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary kept all these things, and pondered them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen, as it was told unto them. Neville closed the Bible, and prayed a prayer beautiful in its sweetness and in its simplicity, for Peggy, for Elizabeth, for Noel. It had been a long time since anyone had prayed for Elizabeth. Not since her father had held her in his arms just before he gave her away at the wedding. She had been embarrassed and had laughed at him. She wasn't laughing now. She was in wonder. Now, presents. Peggy is positively standing on her head to open presents. Mr. Neville, everyone in Australia is standing on their heads, are we not at the bottom of the world, turned upside down? But opening presents is very nice. I'll be for the Christmas, shall I? As Neville spoke, He took a tiny wrapped package from under the tree and gave it to Peggy. She opened it. It was a gold cross. "I found the gold fossicking last winter down an old abandoned gold mine in Ballarat, and I had it made for you." There was a delicate gold chain to go with it. "Oh, Mr. Neville, it is lovely. Thank you so much." "Here's one for you, Elizabeth." Elizabeth looked down at the package in her hand. She was again suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. They had known her for one day, and yet it was as if they had known her a lifetime. She was not used to such kindness. With her, it was about what you could get for yourself, how this would help you get ahead. Every word, every thought, every action was weighed against profit or loss, position or place. Now she truly had nothing. And yet it did not seem to matter with these people. They were kindness itself. She slowly opened the wrapping. Silent tears began to course down her cheeks as she looked at the polished black opal set in gold. She had never seen an opal with such fire. It was as if its very heart were smoldering. You are too kind. I cannot accept this. I have nothing for you. You do not know me. Why are you doing this?" All this came out in a rush between sobs as her voice cracked with the emotion. "We do this because we are commanded to be kind, to do good. We might be entertaining angels without knowing it. Perhaps you are an angel, Miss Elizabeth." No, not that. I am not an angel. Quite the reverse." "Then, Miss Elizabeth, perhaps we do this because you are in need of help." "Help is hard to take, isn't it? Grace is hard to accept. We want to work for what we get. We want to think we deserve what we are owed. You are in need, Miss Elizabeth. Your child is in need. Please, allow us to help you. You've come here in this time and in this place seeking death, and yet you have found life for yourself and for your baby. Please, allow us to give to you." Elizabeth's heart was conquered by the love that overflowed from these two strangers. She nodded. Neville and Peggy smiled. Neville continued to give out such small gifts as he and Peggy had found or made between them. Finally, there came a large wooden case stamped "Fortnum and Masons" from England. Peggy's eyes got bigger. She was excitement itself. "Well, Peggy, let's see what Uncle Rupert and Aunt Letty have sent us, shall we? I have no doubt it is filled with perfectly useless and expensive gifts sent with well-meaning ignorance of where we are and what we're doing." Neville took a small pry bar he used in the mine and pried open the box. It was filled with those exactly expensive and useless things he had grown to expect from his only family. Pickled quail eggs, a Christmas pudding long dried out, a woolen scarf, a fur hat, fur-lined leather gloves, snowshoes, a tin of digestive biscuits, tinned eels, Christmas crackers, the most foul-smelling cheese he had ever encountered. With each successive package, Neville handed them out in turn to the ladies and made a pile for himself. Elizabeth began to wonder if insanity ran in his family. Tinned boar, a mustache cup. Neville was clean-shaven. A marble chess set with an onyx board. Finally, as the last of the packages had come out and everyone had stopped laughing from the horde of useless items, Elizabeth looked at Neville questioningly. "My aunt and uncle are quite old. They have been laboring under the delusion for years now, since I have come out here, that I live in Antarctica, not in Australia, that I am married, that I have several children. They send their equally ancient butler to Fortnum and Mason's, that venerable establishment, with instructions to get things to help me survive in order to return to civilization, which in their minds can only mean England, that green and pleasant land. Neville was wiping his eyes from laughter. It would be impossible to change their minds, and so Peggy and I look on these gift boxes as a kind of glorious white elephant Christmas tradition. We laugh because we couldn't do anything else. It would just lead to frustration and perhaps even bitterness. Have a pickled quail egg. The morning had wandered toward noon. Elizabeth had taken Noel to her room to be fed, changed, and put down for a nap. Peggy had excused herself several times to see to luncheon. Elizabeth heard a tiny gong sounding, announcing lunch. She was met by Neville to escort her into the dining room, for so it was, with the table and chairs of carved walnut, silver settings, crystal stemware, Ainsley china. The two of them sat quietly while Peggy served, and then sat down herself. There was kangaroo, crocodile, things that Elizabeth had tasted before, but not so good as this. Potatoes, parsnips, other vegetables, even the pickled quail eggs had made it to the table. But not the eel, Elizabeth was happy to see. She had not seen so much food at one time since the trip to Melbourne. She ate and ate. There had been small talk, such talk as people who are strangers make to be polite. But finally Elizabeth could contain herself no longer. "Mr. Neville, I do not understand you or your situation. My late husband and I came here to seek a fortune that we had lost. By the time we arrived, we had almost nothing. I still have nothing, and yet here you are, surrounded by seeming wealth, and yet you labor as hard as any coal miner. If you will forgive me, my curiosity has outpaced my manners. Would you please explain?" "As you wish. I come from an old English family, with more land than money, and very little sense. The things you see around are family things, passed down from generation to generation. I feel a certain responsibility to pass them on to such family as might come after me, as those did who came before me, and so I cannot bring myself to sell them. Like you, I came to Australia to make my fortune, albeit with happier circumstances than you have found. I've made enough here to meet my needs, but not enough to return to England, to rescue my family. The work is hard, but I am not afraid of work. It is only menial if I make it so. I have a strong back to dig the stones, and a quick mind that helps me make a profit. So, here we are, surrounded by fine things, eating with silver, china, crystal from days gone by. In the proverbial nutshell, there you have it." Elizabeth nodded. "I, too, come from better circumstances. My father is a wealthy man. I grew up with fine things, as did my husband, but he never learned to work, believing that his family money would never run out, but it did. We came here to seek our fortunes, but we were swindled, and we lost everything. When you found me, I had just buried my husband in a shallow grave that I dug myself. I had determined to walk into the outback until I died from dehydration or sunstroke. Such little we had I gave to the local creditors to satisfy our debts, and I am possessed of that in which Peggy found me, and nothing more." "Your father? Could he help you? Would he help you?" "That would require my asking, and I would not wish to do so. While I possess little in this world's goods, I have more than my share of pride." "Ah, yes. I understand pride quite well myself. I, too, possess it in vast quantities." They continued the meal, taking refuge in small talk once again. Peggy moved in and around them, serving and eating with them. Finally, she brought in the Christmas pudding. Neville poured brandy over it and set it on fire. Peggy had turned down the lamps so that the flame would light the darkness. They marveled over the flame and the richness of the pudding. Each had their portion when the flames had died down and the lamplight blazed again. Elizabeth was savoring the rich flavors when she encountered something hard between her teeth. Is there something in this cake? Oh dear. Yes. I'm so sorry. It's an old English tradition. I should have warned you. Elizabeth delicately captured the object in her serviette, not wanting to cause a problem. We put things in our Christmas puddings for luck, for the coming year. Coins, thimbles. I didn't have any coins, and I didn't have any thimbles, and so I gave Peggy something else to stir into the pudding. It's a gold nugget. Please forgive my negligence. On the other hand, you are now in possession of more than what you came with. It's worth a good bit. Enough to get you some clothes, some necessities. Elizabeth's face colored slightly, but she smiled. I remember a story from my Sunday school days when the disciples found a coin in the mouth of a fish. Who am I to argue with such a precedent? They both laughed. Peggy smiled secretly to herself. She had made certain the nugget got in Elizabeth's pudding, just as Mr. Neville had told her to do so. The day continued on with more Christmas music on the Victrola. Neville put on Handel's Messiah, that glorious piece. They spoke together. She cared for the baby. Neville treated her as a welcomed and expected guest. She retired early, with Peggy sleeping in the chair in her room again. Again the feeding, the changing of the baby. She realized now that would be something that would always be a part of her life, this child. The next morning, Peggy brought her breakfast in her room. Is Mr. Neville already at work in the mine? Oh, no, miss. No, Elizabeth, today's Boxing Day. No work today. Is there going to be fighting? Peggy giggled. It's not that kind of boxing. I'll let Mr. Neville explain. They met again in the drawing room. There was a radio playing, giving the BBC news of the day. Civil unrest. Unemployment over 20% for Australia. Neville turned off the radio to save the batteries and wound up the Victrola and put on some more music. Mr. Neville, what is Boxing Day? Peggy said that I should ask you. Well, it's a holiday. The day after Christmas. In England, the people who cooked and served in the great houses never got Christmas Day off, and so Boxing Day became a sort of servants' holiday. But it was also a day when the poor boxes were collected from the churches and they were distributed to the poor families. And so it became a day for doing good, visiting those in need. There are some miners I should like to visit today who have fallen on hard times, such as yourself. Peggy and I usually go see some of them. We give away a few presents. We generally do no work today. You are welcome to join us, or stay here, as you wish. We won't be going far, but you might think it too taxing. No, I think I'd like to go, as long as I can take the baby and it won't be too hot. Good. Peggy has your clothes cleaned and ready, so you won't have to visit in my dressing gown. Australia's informal, but not quite that informal. And so they went out, helping others, giving to some, just visiting with those who were lonely. Little Noel did very well, but by the end of the day, Elizabeth was weary. As they sat at tea that night, Neville spoke to Elizabeth. Miss Elizabeth, I was wondering if you had a place to go, a place to live. No, not really. No, we slept on the floor of the mine or in a tent full of holes that we found on a rubbish heap, but no, I have no place. I'm sure whatever little we had is gone by now, taken by scroungers. I'll leave if you need me to. No, not at all. I would like for you to consider staying here, working for me. Elizabeth's eyes widened, and she began to draw herself up. Please, no, nothing untoward, nothing improper, nothing like that. Peggy has her own place. You would stay with her. She's only been here these last 2 days because of you. No. You would stay with her and work. What would you have me do? I have no skill that would be of use to you, except digging. I have learned to dig. Do you want me to dig? No, but you do have a skill. You have an eye, shall we say, for beauty. What I need is someone who can cut and polish the opals I find. I have the equipment. It's not hard work, but it needs an eye, and I don't have it. I thought perhaps with your upbringing, your schooling, your style, you would be able to get the best look out of the stones. You would cut and polish the stones. You could still care for Noel, have him with you if you like, and live with Peggy. I would pay you a percentage of what we made in the stones, if that would be amenable to you. Elizabeth was overcome. She had truly had no thoughts beyond Noel's next feeding. I will show you what to do. You could work at your own pace. Consider it, and let me know. Is this another rescue? Like Peggy? Are you trying to save me from myself? Do you need rescuing? Do you need saving, Miss Elizabeth? Yes. Yes, I believe I do. Thank you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for your offer. I accept. When shall I start? Whenever you feel up to it. And so after a few more days of rest, time spent buying some clothes and other needs with her gold nugget, Elizabeth began to polish opals. She was constantly amazed by their variety, their beauty, their color. Each day passed into the next. She chose the stones. She cut them. She polished them. She fed Noel. Peggy would often watch him while Elizabeth worked. Noel grew. He learned to roll over, to crawl, to feed himself. He took his first wobbly steps. That was a momentous day. They had all celebrated. Peggy was nanny, sister, friend, mother. Neville would send the stones to market when they were ready, and he would pay her when the monies came in. In the evenings they would have tea together. Their lives wove in and around each other in a tapestry of daily life. They worked all day. They would listen to the radio after tea in the evenings. On Fridays they would roll up the carpet and dance to the ballroom sounds on the radio. On Sunday, Neville would read a sermon from Mr. Spurgeon or Dr. R.A. Torrey. The days passed. The seasons changed. Fall turned into winter. Winter into spring. It was November again. Time for the Melbourne Cup. They listened on the radio as White Nose won. December came in with the heat and with drought. Water was scarce. If it wasn't for the great artesian well in town, there wouldn't be any water. It was coming up to a year since Noel had been born, since Elizabeth had come to stay with Peggy. Each went about their daily tasks, Neville digging, following a vein of opal, Elizabeth cutting and polishing the stones, Peggy cleaning, cooking, caring for everyone. Elizabeth was at the polishing wheel when Peggy rushed in, Noel on her hip. "Oh, Miss Elizabeth, come quick, come quick. It's been a cave-in. Mr. Neville's hurt bad." Elizabeth left everything and flew after Peggy. The dust from the cave-in filled the air. "Peggy, take Noel away from this. I'll see to Mr. Neville." Neville was still breathing, but she could see blood. Slowly she began to clear the fallen stones away. She moved slowly, deliberately, gently. She did not wish to call another cave-in or give Neville any pain. Finally, when everything was cleared away, she could begin to tend to Neville. He was still unconscious, but his breathing was steady. There was a gash on his head. His arm was at a strange angle. She straightened the arm gently, carefully. She cleaned the head wound, bound it up. Slowly, painfully, she dragged Neville away from the cave-in. With Peggy's help, Elizabeth got Neville into his bed. She left him there and went for the doctor. As she walked, the events of the last year came back to her. Last year she was walking away from life. Now she was walking for life. Neville's life. It suddenly welled up within her that she loved him. That she had loved him for some time. But love for her, true love, was a new feeling. One that she did not easily trust. As she strode along, she began to weep. And then pray. She had never really prayed before. "Oh God, please don't let Neville die. Oh God, please, please don't let Neville die. I know you have no reason to listen to me. I am not your child. I do not know you, but Neville is your child. He does know you. Oh, please, 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 don't let him die." As she prayed and walked and wept, her heart opened to God. The sermons she had heard Neville read the past year, the prayers she had heard him say, the words of her own father, the Sunday school lessons from her childhood, they all flooded her heart and her mind. In quiet desperation, she stopped. She fell to her knees. She came to God, the Father, as his child. She rose up. She continued walking and praying. The peace of God was in her heart now. She reached the district clinic. The doctor was in. They drove back to the mine in his old Holden. He had diagnosed a concussion. He set the broken arm. Only time will heal him now. Either he will come out of his own, or he will never wake again. Keep him comfortable. I'll check back in a few days. And so the watch began. Day after day, Elizabeth would work the mine, cut, polish the stones, doing Neville's work and her own. At night, she would sleep fitfully in a chair in his room, watching over him. Peggy watched him during the day. There was no change, and it was coming on Christmas. The drought had continued. Water was low. Money was tight because Elizabeth had no idea how to sell what they had mined. Times were hard for the nation, for the world. Peggy had begun playing Christmas records in the hope that it would wake Neville. By now, Elizabeth had almost given up hope. Every day she prayed that God would heal, that he would bring rain, that things would get better, but perhaps it was not God's will. Perhaps this was somehow part of God's plan to draw them to himself. Christmas Eve came, and with it, Noel's birthday. They celebrated quietly. Peggy made a small cake, which Noel proceeded to smear all over his face. Even in this joy, they were subdued. Peggy put Noel to bed. Elizabeth took up her lonely vigil over Neville. In the small hours of Christmas morning, Neville began to move. Slowly at first, restlessly, and then his eyes opened. He looked confusedly about the room. Then his eyes lit on Elizabeth. Elizabeth? Yes. 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 Tears sprung in her eyes. How long? 3 weeks. Cave in? Yes. Did you find it? Find what? The stone. What stone? The stone. The biggest opal I have ever found. No. We've got to find it. He began pulling at the covers with his one good arm. She tried to stop him. You can't. You're still weak. Weak or not, we've got to find that stone. He swung his legs around and began to get up. He lost his balance. He began to fall. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around him. He kissed her full on the mouth. When they had parted, she smiled and said, "You need a shave." Whose fault is that? But I couldn't resist. Slowly, carefully by lamplight, they made their way through this hall toward the mine. Neville was bewildered when they reached the place where he had been digging. Where's the cave-in? Cleared away. Who cleared it? I did. Mines don't dig themselves, you know. He smiled at his words thrown back at him from a year ago. But how? I shored up the mine. I dug what I could. I cleared the cave-in away. I cut and polished what I found. We kept going. There wasn't anything else to do. We've got to find that stone. Where are the tailings? They're up top. I would take them out each day. They made their way to the surface where the small shack and a mountain of tailings were awaiting them. We will never find it. I'm so sorry. As they reached the surface, they heard and felt the first drops of rain. There was a storm. The lightning was flashing on Lightning Ridge. The rain was pouring down, washing away the red dirt of the ages. After a time it was quiet. The downbursts passed. And in its place, under the full moon, shone opals, black and sparkling in the moonlight. Neville walked over and picked up a stone larger than an egg and held it out to Elizabeth. This is what I found. This is what caused the cave-in. I saw it in the vein. I was so excited I chiseled it out without thinking. Before I knew it, the world fell in on me. Look at it. Even here in the moonlight you can see its fire. This will restore our fortunes. Elizabeth took the stone from him and turned it in her hand. She could indeed see its fire. Indeed, this stone would be the one that would restore Neville's fortune. It was enormous. It was the reason people came to seek their fortune, to get a stake. Perhaps now he would leave Australia, leave her, go back to England, his home. Now that you have this, what will you do? Will you leave? She asked quietly, putting the stone back in his hand. Well, I was thinking of getting married, if you'll have me. Will you marry me, Elizabeth? She nodded, smiled, kissed him again. As they stood there in the moonlight, surrounded by opals, she told him what was in her heart, what had happened to her while he lay unconscious, of what God had done in her life. Finally, she knew what Christmas was truly all about. It was about the Christ child. It was about the Son of God. It was about family, about forgiveness, about healing the hurts of the heart. Happy Christmas, Neville said. Happy Christmas, Elizabeth smiled. The end. May the grace and peace of God fill your heart and home. And from our family to you, as the English say, Happy Christmas.